Now let's talk about factors of political participation. So both regimes support forms of participation to influence policymaking because casting votes in a public election brings legitimacy. However, it differs between regimes on how much citizens actually have on influencing policy and how open and competitive their elections are. We obviously know in democratic regimes, citizens have more influence and more input, and the elections are more competitive and more free and more open. So, for example, in 2012, Russia, an authoritarian regime, passed legislation nationwide to criminalize large gatherings, which can obviously decrease protests and other form of political participation. In many elections in authoritarian regimes, there are few, if any, opposition candidates, like in China. Those advocating different from views are not allowed to run for office. You must be a member of the Communist Party in China to run for office. In Iran, you must not interfere with the promotion of Sharia Islam. So if you're not a Muslim, you basically can't be president in Iran. There's no formal political party systems within Iran either. The government often intervenes in these elections to ensure that its preferred candidates and parties win, and that's typically common in Russia. So let's talk about Iran and Russia particularly. So Iran and Russia both hold regularly scheduled fixed-term elections for national government leaders like the president, as per their constitutions, to try to establish some legitimacy from the results that seemingly always show majority support for their governments. Both regimes demonstrate authoritarian tendencies, though, because they limit competition from opposing candidates and candidates with different beliefs, and they also limit the citizens' impact on policies. For presidential elections, both have direct elections for the president in which the winning candidates must get majority of the vote between two candidates in a first or second round of voting. Both candidates reject who can run in opposition to the government's preferred candidates. The problem already is that the government prefers someone. The government should allow anyone to run without taking sides. Iran's Guardian Council will vet candidates and restrict those who support relatively moderate viewpoints in opposition to the supreme leader. Russia has a central election commission to approve which candidates can run for president. In some cases, the government has prevented candidates who support more liberal democratic reforms like free speech and rule of law. High-profile human rights activist Alexei Navalny submitted the required number of signed petitions to run for president in 2018. So he was able to run for president in 2018. However, he was not able to. He was prohibited by the election commission. Why? Because of a previous corruption conviction that he says was politically motivated. Russia's government controls almost all the broadcast and media outlets and only lets their favorite candidates get news coverage or the front page during elections. Neither Putin nor his political ally Medvedev have faced enough competition to force even a second round of voting during an election. They've always won the first time. Since Putin's first election in 2000, he's on his fifth or sixth term by now, the government has used manipulative tactics to make United Russia the dominant party, that's Putin's party, and there's no really challenge for power in elections, or anything for that matter. Iran has had more presidential elections go into second rounds of voting between two candidates, but in 2009, the government was widely suspected of creating a fraudulent election and election environment in favor of their preferred candidate Mohammad Ahmadinejad. There's no B in there. I don't know why I said that. I can't say certain words, guys. The government used violence to suppress the protests against the election. They didn't allow for the political participation to occur. And the closest opponent in the 2009 election was put under house arrest when he communicated support of the anti-government protests as a valid form of political participation. They're like, wait, you want them to go against the government? No, you're on house arrest. And he's still on house arrest. Let's talk about Mexico and Nigeria now, our democratizing regimes. So since 2000, both Mexico and Nigeria have moved towards more competitive and free and fair election systems, and citizens actually have a say in shaping policy. They both had dominant party systems. In Nigeria, this was typically through the military, and in Mexico, this was the PRI party that had no competition, but now they do have competition, and this is thanks to democratization that have promoted electoral rules influenced by independent regulatory organizations that they've installed to prevent electoral fraud. One similar change in both countries was a move to to provide all voters with a voter identification system. They have ID cards now to reduce voter fraud that benefited the dominant party or any kind of voter fraud at all. So you have to have some kind of ID now to vote. Nigeria has a lot of biometric data now, too, in their elections. Mexico has had two other political parties defeat the dominant party for the presidency now. So that shows competition. And this has also happened in the legislature since 2000. Nigeria has seen other parties defeat the former dominant party for the presidency and take control of the national legislature. So they see both the executive and legislative branches have dominant party shifts throughout the last 20-something years. So we've talked a lot about formal political participation, like voting. Now let's talk about informal participation. So informal participation includes protests, boycotts, strikes, just commentary, like Ben Shapiro, artistic expression, like political cartoons, and political criticism that's expressed through social media that's treated differently across regime types. So, of course, democratic regimes support this. Authoritarian regimes find it unfair. In authoritarian regimes, there's less tolerance of critical viewpoints. And if you haven't taken that away yet, please watch the video again. Because they say that it's going to challenge their regimes and overthrow them. In China, the government frequently uses surveillance technology to catch and punish those who use the internet and social media platforms to criticize the Communist Party. They've begun to sell this technology to other authoritarian governments. They have increased demands for internet publishers register with the government for permits. These requirements reduce the amount of news content available on the internet and social media. China also has a great firewall technology that censors content and images that are critical and unflattering to the CCP and its leaders. I would not be surprised if my content was banned in China, because I don't think I've ever said something good about China in any of my videos. Oh, there's two of them. In Iran, the government slows down internet connections during times of large protests, and sometimes they shut it down, like they did in 2019. They did it for 6 days. The government also uses surveillance technology, like in China, to catch and punish those who use the internet and social media to promote protests against the government and promote rights for gay citizens, which goes against Islamic beliefs. Iran's government uses technology to block websites and some social media platforms like China that are critical of the government and its leaders. In Russia, the government allows more access to the internet to a wider population than China or Iran. However, Russia has reduced information that is critical of the government by increasing demands that government publishers reduce anonymous users and register as foreign agents if they want to receive funding from foreign sources. So they're not out of the woods just yet. They got to work to it. They're not moving anywhere anytime soon. The government has blocked some social media platforms like LinkedIn that have refused to provide government intelligence agencies with encryption data. So essentially, like, if you're not going to give us the goods, we're going to exterminate you a little bit. Now let's talk about restrictions on political participation. So all regimes, of course, have some kind of restrictions to maintain security and to prevent violence within the countries and disruption and maintain public order. Authoritarian regimes manage and limit participation to a greater extent. And large 1968 protests critical of the government's treatment of the poor in Mexico, government implemented security forces to shoot firearms into crowds in an effort to disperse and suppress the protests. Mexico's government has attempted to investigate this 1968 violence. They've attempted to investigate it. That's the key word there. Since investigations began, various government leaders have been accused of approving the violent tactics. And this has been spread through media reports and legal proceedings. And no government leaders have been convicted, though, of being responsible for these murders. However, the government does allow, this is a democratic thing for them to do, allow commemorative marches in public spaces to take place by prosecutors who call for accountability of the leaders who approved of these violent tactics against the demonstrators. Let's talk about mass movements now. I feel like we've been talking about this forever. Authoritarian regimes tolerate mass political protests and movements less. How many times can I say that today? Valuing public order more than individual liberties and civil rights. China's government took control of Hong Kong as a special administrative territory of China after the UK relinquished control of this former colony. So the UK gave it up. They like, we're done with you. We don't need you anymore. And China was like, let's take it on. We'll take care of it. We'll nourish it. We won't make the people mad in any way. That's not something we do here in China. As China's government has increased its influence on the governments of Hong Kong, they've been many large protests in the streets against China and their electoral policies and their restricted due process, intended to influence the government's control and say-so over residents of Hong Kong. Two remarkable protests in 2014 and 2019 that were met with violence by Hong Kong security forces that attempt to suppress them. Iran's government has used manipulation and violence to suppress the widespread protests related to the 2009 presidential election. The government has used, of course, surveillance technology and manipulative measures to restrict mass protests from even being organized since then. So it was kind of a precedent for them. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.